The day I was supposed to marry Daniel Walker began like something out of a luxury magazine. Crystal chandeliers glowed above the ballroom of the Langford Grand Hotel in Chicago. White roses filled the air with a soft scent. A string quartet played quietly near the tall windows overlooking Lake Michigan. 200 guests had flown in for the wedding. The Walker family was famous in certain business circles. Old Chicago money, real estate, investment funds, and an endless collection of vacation homes scattered across Florida's most expensive beaches. Daniel used to joke that his family owned more sand than the state itself. At the time, I laughed. That morning, I stood in front of a tall mirror in the bridal suite while my mother adjusted the veil on my shoulders. "You look calm," she said softly. "I am," I replied. And I truly believed it. Daniel and I had been together for 5 years. We met at a tech conference in Austin where my startup was presenting a prototype for an artificial intelligence platform. Daniel had approached me afterward, confident and charming, asking smart questions about machine learning models. Unlike most people who pretended to understand technology, he actually listened. At least, that's what I believed. Over the years, our lives blended easily. My company grew faster than expected. Daniel launched a logistics platform that struggled during its early years, but I supported him through every difficult moment. Long nights, investors backing out, payroll crises. I stood beside him through all of it. Our engagement came 2 years ago during a quiet dinner on the Amalfi Coast. No cameras, no audience, just a ring and a promise. Or at least that's what I thought it was. The ceremony began at exactly 4 in the afternoon. Guests filled the white chairs arranged along the aisle. My father held my arm as we walked slowly toward the altar where Daniel waited in a tailored navy suit. He looked perfect, confident, relaxed. His mother, Diane Walker, sat in the front row. Diane was the type of woman people noticed immediately. Tall, perfect posture, silver hair styled like she had just stepped out of a magazine advertisement for luxury watches. She had always been polite to me, never warm, but never openly hostile either, just controlled. As my father placed my hand into Daniel's, I felt the quiet excitement that every bride probably hopes to feel. For a moment, everything was still. The officiant smiled. "We are gathered here today." "Stop." The voice cut through the room like glass breaking. Every head turned. Diane Walker was standing. At first, I thought something terrible had happened. A medical emergency. But Diane looked perfectly composed. She walked calmly down the aisle toward us, holding a slim black leather folder in her hand. The string quartet stopped playing. The entire ballroom went silent. "Before the ceremony continues," Diane said, her voice cool and precise, "there is a matter that must be addressed." Daniel didn't look surprised. That was the first moment something inside me shifted. Diane stopped directly in front of us and opened the folder. Inside was a printed document with several legal tabs attached. "A simple agreement," she said. Then she turned to me. "Lily, before you become part of the Walker family, we need your signature." The guests began whispering quietly. I could feel hundreds of eyes watching. "What kind of agreement?" I asked. Her smile was thin. "It confirms that you will never claim ownership or inheritance rights to any Walker family vacation properties in Florida." She paused. "There are currently 7 of them." A soft ripple of murmurs spread across the room. My father stiffened beside me. "This conversation can happen later," he said firmly. But Diane ignored him completely. "This must be signed now," she said. Then she handed me the pen. "Otherwise," she added calmly, "the wedding cannot continue." For a moment, I simply stared at the document. The room felt strangely quiet, like everyone was holding their breath. I looked at Daniel. He avoided my eyes. And suddenly, everything made sense. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned. Carefully. Publicly. Deliberately. And the real humiliation had only just begun. For a few seconds, no one in the ballroom moved. 200 guests sat frozen in their chairs, watching the strange scene unfolding at the altar. Phones slowly began appearing in people's hands. Recording. Of course they were recording. Chicago society loved a scandal almost as much as it loved a wedding. I lowered my eyes to the document Diane had handed me. Even without reading every word, I could already see what it was. A legal waiver. Several pages long. Professional formatting. Prepared by attorneys. Tabs marked property rights, future claims, inheritance waiver. This wasn't written last night. This had been prepared weeks ago. Maybe months. I looked up slowly. Why now? I asked quietly. Diane clasped her hands together like a patient schoolteacher. Because once the ceremony is completed, she said smoothly, things become legally complicated. Her gaze moved briefly toward the guests. This protects the Walker family from misunderstandings in the future. A few uncomfortable chuckles came from somewhere in the crowd. My father stepped forward. This is inappropriate, he said sharply. You don't ambush someone like this at their own wedding. Diane didn't even look at him. Her eyes stayed on me. This is simply a formality, she said. Then, after a small pause, she added something that made the entire situation suddenly very clear. If Lily has nothing to gain from the Walker properties, signing shouldn't be a problem. A test. A public loyalty test. I slowly turned my head toward Daniel. He was staring down at the marble floor. Daniel, I said. He finally looked at me. There was something strange in his expression. Not guilt. Not even discomfort. Just tension. Like someone waiting to see how a gamble plays out. My mother just wants clarity, he said carefully. Clarity. I almost laughed. You knew about this? I asked. A pause. Then he nodded. Yes. Not even an attempt to deny it. Not even embarrassment. The guests were whispering louder now. Phones lifted higher. This was becoming entertainment. I could practically feel the humiliation Diane had designed. Bride cornered at the altar. Forced to prove she wasn't marrying for money. And if I refused, the wedding would collapse. In front of everyone. Diane tilted the document toward me again. Please sign on the marked page. Her tone remained calm. Professional. Like she was closing a real estate transaction instead of interrupting a wedding ceremony. I took the pen. My mother gasped quietly behind me. Lily, she whispered. But I was no longer listening to anyone. Instead, I finally looked directly into Diane Walker's eyes. For the first time since she approached the altar, I smiled. A small, polite smile. Something about it made her blink. Because in that moment, I understood something very important. They thought they were humiliating me. They thought I would panic, argue, cry, maybe refuse. They were expecting emotion. Instead, I simply nodded. Of course, I said calmly. The ballroom went quiet again. I flipped through the pages slowly, as if reviewing the contract carefully. In reality, I only needed a few seconds. Because the truth was, I didn't care about the Florida houses. Not even a little. 7 luxury vacation homes. Beachfront villas. Private docks. Millions of dollars in property. But Diane Walker had made one fatal mistake. She assumed I wanted something from her family. She assumed I needed it. And that misunderstanding was about to become very expensive. I reached the signature page. The line waited at the bottom. Lily Harper. I signed. Clean. Simple. Without hesitation. The scratch of the pen echoed faintly through the silent ballroom. For a moment, nobody reacted. Then a wave of murmurs spread through the room. Some guests even clapped softly. Diane accepted the document back, clearly satisfied. Her lips curled into a victorious smile. Wonderful, she said. Then she turned toward the officiant. We may proceed. Daniel exhaled beside me, relieved. The officiant adjusted his glasses and prepared to continue the ceremony. But before he could say another word, I reached for the microphone. The microphone felt cool in my hand. A faint static sound echoed through the ballroom speakers as I lifted it from the stand beside the officiant. For the first time since Diane had walked down the aisle, the entire room went completely silent. Daniel turned toward me, confused. Lily, he said quietly. I looked out across the room. Rows of guests. Old Chicago families. Business partners. Friends. Investors. People who had traveled across the country for this wedding. Many of them were still holding their phones up, recording. Good. That would make things easier. I adjusted the microphone slightly. Thank you, Diane, I said calmly. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Diane remained standing near the front row, still holding the signed agreement like a trophy. Her expression was satisfied.
Certain.
She believed the problem had been solved. But the problem had only just begun. I turned slowly toward the officiant. I'm sorry, I said politely, but we're going to need to pause the ceremony for a moment. The officiant blinked. Of course, he said cautiously. Daniel leaned closer to me. What are you doing? He whispered. I didn't answer him. Instead, I looked back at the audience. Since we've already introduced legal paperwork into the wedding, I continued evenly, I think it's only fair that everyone understands the situation completely. A ripple of curiosity spread through the room. Some guests leaned forward. Diane's smile faded slightly. Lily, she said sharply, this is not necessary. I ignored her. My voice remained calm, controlled. I've just signed an agreement confirming that I will never claim any ownership or inheritance rights to the Walker family vacation properties in Florida. I paused. 7 houses, if I understood correctly. A few quiet laughs appeared in the audience. The tension had become something else now. Interest. People loved watching power shift in real time. Daniel shifted beside me. You've signed it, he said under his breath. Let's just finish the ceremony. I finally turned toward him and smiled. That's exactly what I'm doing, I said. Then I faced the room again. I signed the agreement willingly. I continued. Because Diane is absolutely right. Another pause. I have no interest in the Walker family's vacation homes. Diane crossed her arms. Then we are finished here, she said coldly. I shook my head gently. No, I said. We're not. The ballroom seemed to shrink around us. 200 people watching. Waiting. I took a slow breath. And then I delivered the sentence that none of them were expecting. This wedding, I said clearly into the microphone, is officially canceled. For a moment, no one reacted. The words simply floated in the air. Unprocessed. Then the room exploded. Gasps. Shouting. Chairs scraping the floor. Someone dropped a glass. What? Daniel said, his voice cracking. The officiant stepped back in shock. Diane's face went pale. You can't be serious, she said. But I was already removing the engagement ring from my finger. The diamond caught the light of the chandeliers as I placed it calmly into Daniel's stunned hand. I'm very serious, I said. The ballroom was now buzzing with chaos. Guests whispering. Phones recording from every angle. Daniel stared at the ring like it had burned him. Lily, he said desperately. What are you doing? I looked at him for a long moment. Then I returned my attention to the microphone. Since we've already handled the Walker family's financial concerns, I said evenly, it's only fair that I address one small matter of my own. The room slowly quieted again. People leaned forward, waiting, because deep down they could feel it. Something bigger was coming, and I hadn't even begun yet. The ballroom slowly quieted again, not because people had calmed down, but because curiosity was stronger than chaos. 200 guests leaned forward, watching me like the next scene of a movie they suddenly realized was far more interesting than a wedding ceremony. Daniel looked pale. Lily, please, he said quietly. Don't do this. I glanced at him. Don't do what? His mouth opened, but no words came out. Behind him, Diane Walker had completely lost her earlier composure. Her perfect posture was still there, but the confidence had cracked. You're embarrassing yourself, she said coldly. I smiled slightly. No, Diane, I replied calmly. I'm correcting a misunderstanding. The microphone carried every word through the silent ballroom. I turned back toward the guests. Earlier this year, I said, I prepared a wedding gift for Daniel. That sentence instantly pulled the room into complete attention again. People loved gifts, especially expensive ones. Daniel frowned. A gift, he asked. Yes, I said. I reached toward the small white envelope that had been resting on the ceremony table beside the flowers. It had been there the entire time. No one had noticed. I held it up slightly. This was supposed to be my surprise for Daniel after the ceremony. Diane scoffed. I assure you, we are not interested in your gifts. I ignored her. Instead, I carefully opened the envelope and pulled out a single document. Several people in the front rows leaned forward, trying to read it. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Neuralink Systems, I continued. A few guests nodded quietly. They knew the name. Chicago's tech scene was smaller than people thought. 6 months ago, I said, our artificial intelligence platform secured a new round of venture funding. Daniel shifted beside me. He knew this already. He had celebrated the deal with me. What he didn't know was the rest of the story. The company's current valuation, I continued calmly, is approximately $53 million. Now the whispers began again. That number carried weight. But I wasn't finished. As a wedding gift, I said, I prepared a transfer of equity shares to Daniel Walker. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. A transfer, he repeated. I held up the document. 15% of my personal founder shares. Someone in the audience gasped. It wasn't a quiet gasp either. It was the kind that spreads through a room like electricity, because people could do the math. 15% at a $53 million valuation. Roughly $8 million. I looked directly at Daniel. That was going to be my wedding gift. His face had turned completely white. Diane blinked. 8 million, someone whispered in the crowd. Daniel stared at the paper in my hand like it was something unreal. You never told me, he said. It was meant to be a surprise, I replied. A long silence followed. Then I gently slid the document back into the envelope. But unfortunately, I continued calmly, since the wedding has now been canceled. I paused. The gift is no longer necessary. You could almost hear the exact moment the room understood what I meant. The whispers exploded again. Diane stepped forward suddenly. That is ridiculous, she snapped. You can't parade imaginary money in front of people. I tilted my head slightly. Imaginary? Then I reached into the envelope again. This time I removed a second document. Stamped. Signed. Official. The share transfer was already prepared by my corporate attorneys, I said calmly. I held the page high enough for the front rows to see the legal stamp. It only required my signature after the ceremony. Daniel's hands were shaking now. You are going to give me $8 million, he whispered. I nodded. Yes. Another pause. Then I folded the document slowly. But again, I said evenly, that gift was meant for my husband. I looked around the ballroom one more time. And since I no longer have one, I placed the envelope back on the table. The offer is withdrawn. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before. Because the Walker family had just realized something they hadn't considered. They had been protecting their Florida vacation homes. And in the process, they had just lost something far more valuable. But the worst part for Daniel still hadn't arrived. The silence in the ballroom had changed. It was no longer the curious silence of guests watching an awkward moment. Now it was the heavy silence of people realizing they had just witnessed a very expensive mistake. Daniel still hadn't moved. His eyes remained fixed on the envelope resting on the ceremony table. $8 million. Gone in less than 30 seconds. Diane was the first one to recover. This is theatrical nonsense, she said sharply. You're trying to humiliate this family. I looked at her calmly. Diane, you interrupted a wedding ceremony to present legal paperwork. A few quiet laughs appeared in the crowd. I'm simply continuing the theme. Her jaw tightened. Daniel finally spoke again. You are really going to give me those shares? He asked quietly. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because gifts are supposed to be surprises. He looked like someone who had just woken up from a dream and realized the ground beneath him had disappeared. I don't understand, he murmured. That was when I took a slow breath. Then let me clarify something else. I picked up the microphone again. There is one more financial detail that should probably be discussed before everyone leaves. Several guests straightened in their seats. The tension in the room returned instantly. Diane crossed her arms. I think we've heard quite enough. I disagree, I said calmly. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my wedding jacket. This time, I removed a small leather document holder. Daniel frowned. What is that? I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Not glamorous. Not dramatic. Just a simple legal document with several signatures and a raised notary seal. The kind of document that quietly changes people's lives. I held it up. 3 years ago, I said evenly, Daniel's logistics company was close to bankruptcy. Daniel froze. The guests murmured again. He glanced nervously toward the audience. Lily, he whispered, this isn't. But I continued speaking. Several investors had pulled out, I said. Payroll was overdue. The company's accounts were almost empty. Daniel's breathing had become uneven. You told me that yourself, I added. Diane stepped forward. My son built his company through hard work. I nodded. Yes, I said. And through help. I lifted the document slightly higher. Specifically, I paused. $600,000 of help. Now the entire room went silent again. Daniel's face drained of color. No, he said quietly. I unfolded the paper. The raised seal caught the chandelier light. This is a notarized loan agreement, I said calmly. A private loan issued to Daniel Walker 3 years ago. The murmurs exploded across the ballroom. Daniel stared at the document in horror. You promised you'd never. I promised I wouldn't embarrass you, I corrected. My voice remained calm, but that promise was made under very different circumstances. I turned the document toward the audience. The numbers were clearly printed near the center of the page. Loan amount, $600,000. Someone gasped again. Daniel shook his head. This isn't fair, he said weakly. I continued. The loan allowed Daniel's company to continue operating during a critical financial period. Diane looked completely stunned. You loaned him money? She asked. Daniel avoided her eyes. I nodded. Yes. Another pause. Then, I read the final line of the document. The agreement includes a standard repayment clause. I let the words hang for a moment. With interest, I looked directly at Daniel. The total balance, due today, another pause, is approximately $850,000. The ballroom erupted again. People whispering. Phones recording. Guests turning to each other in disbelief. But I wasn't finished. I gently placed the document back into the leather holder. The repayment deadline, I said calmly, was scheduled for one specific date. Daniel whispered my name. Lily, please. But the date was already printed clearly at the bottom of the contract. I spoke it into the microphone. Today. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before. Because in the span of 10 minutes, Daniel Walker had lost an $8 million gift and gained an $800,000 debt, right in front of everyone he knew. For several seconds, Daniel didn't move. He simply stood there beside me at the altar, staring at the leather folder in my hands like it contained something radioactive. The number had settled into the room. $850,000. Due today. Guests whispered loudly now. Some weren't even trying to be discreet anymore. Phones were raised everywhere. Someone near the back muttered, "This is insane." Daniel finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "You can't do this." I tilted my head slightly. I already did. His breathing had become uneven. "Lily, we talked about that loan," he said. "You said you trusted me." "I did," I replied calmly. The word did hung in the air longer than anything else. Diane suddenly stepped forward again, her heels striking the marble floor sharply. "This is extortion," she snapped. Several guests turned toward her. "It's a notarized loan agreement," I said evenly. "Your son signed it voluntarily in my office 3 years ago." Daniel's hands were trembling now. "That money saved my company," he said desperately. "Yes," I said. "And I was happy to help you." I paused. "Back when we were partners." A few quiet murmurs spread through the crowd again. Diane turned toward her son. "You borrowed $600,000 from her?" she demanded. Daniel didn't answer, which was answer enough. Her face slowly turned red. You told me your investors covered that gap. Daniel rubbed his forehead. They were supposed to. The room felt like it had become smaller. Guests leaned forward in their seats, fully absorbed now. No one was thinking about the canceled wedding anymore. They were watching a family collapse in real time. Daniel suddenly stepped toward me. Please, he said quietly. The confidence he carried earlier was completely gone. This doesn't have to happen like this. I met his eyes calmly. It already has. His voice cracked. I made a mistake. I said nothing. I should have stopped my mother, he continued. I should have told her no. Another long pause. Then he said something that made the room go completely still. Please marry me anyway. A few people gasped. Even Diane looked shocked. Daniel's voice dropped lower. We can fix this, he said. We can handle the loan privately. I'll sign whatever you want. I studied his face for a moment. For the first time since the ceremony started, he looked afraid. Not embarrassed. Not angry. Afraid. And suddenly, he did something no one in the Walker family had done all afternoon. He humbled himself. Daniel Walker dropped to his knees in the middle of the ballroom. Please, Lily, he said. The room exploded with whispers again. Diane looked like she had just witnessed a car crash. Daniel, she hissed. Stand up. But he didn't move. He was staring up at me with desperation in his eyes. I love you, he said. I watched him quietly for a long moment. Then I leaned slightly closer to the microphone. Daniel, I said softly. You don't love me. The room went silent again. You loved the version of me you thought you controlled. I continued. I straightened and stepped back. But that version never existed. Daniel's shoulders collapsed. Diane, meanwhile, had completely lost the composed elegance she carried earlier. Her voice rose sharply. This is a disgrace, she shouted. You planned this entire spectacle. I shrugged lightly. No, I said. You did. Her face twisted with anger. You're a manipulative little. Careful, my father said calmly from behind me. It was the first time he had spoken in several minutes, and his tone carried the quiet authority of someone who had watched enough. I turned off the microphone. The ballroom instantly filled with noise again. People talking, chairs moving, phones still recording. But for me, the moment was already over. I handed the leather folder with the loan contract to my father. Please give this to our attorney, I said quietly. He nodded. Of course. My mother stepped beside me and gently placed a hand on my arm. You ready? She asked. I glanced one last time at the altar. Daniel was still kneeling. Diane was shouting at him in furious whispers. The guests were already spreading the story among themselves. And somewhere in that chaos, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. I turned toward the exit and walked out of the ballroom with my parents. Behind us, the Walker family was beginning to fall apart. By the time we reached the hotel lobby, my phone had already started vibrating. Again, and again, and again. Messages, calls, notifications. I didn't even need to check to know what was happening. 200 guests, 200 phones. Chicago's society moved fast, but social media moved faster. My mother glanced at the screen lighting up in my hand. Already, she asked. I nodded. Already. Outside the Langford Grand Hotel, the late afternoon sun reflected off the glass towers of downtown Chicago. The city looked calm, ordinary, completely unaware that inside the ballroom upstairs a very public disaster had just taken place. My father opened the car door for us. Before getting in, I finally looked at my phone. The first message was from my assistant. Lily, are you okay? The video is everywhere. The second was from one of my investors. Call me when you can. I assume the wedding is off. Then came dozens more. Friends, colleagues, journalists, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. But one notification stood out. A video link. The caption read, Chicago wedding turns into $8 million scandal. I didn't even need to watch it. I already knew the footage. Diane walking down the aisle. The document. My signature. The microphone. The canceled wedding. Daniel on his knees. Every second of it had been captured. and now it was spreading.
Fast.
We drove away from the hotel in silence. 10 minutes later, my father's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "Your future ex-mother-in-law," he said. I raised an eyebrow. That was quick. He answered and put the call on speaker. Diane's voice exploded through the car. "You set us up." Her composure from the ballroom was completely gone. My father remained calm. "Good evening, Diane." "You manipulated my son," she shouted. "You humiliated our family in front of everyone." I leaned slightly toward the phone. "You brought legal contracts to a wedding ceremony," I said calmly. "You forced me to sign them in public. You humiliated yourself." There was a brief silence. Then Diane's voice dropped into something colder. "You think this is over?" "No," I said. "It's just beginning." The call ended abruptly. My father sighed. "Well," he said, "that went about as expected. But the real collapse didn't happen in our car. It happened inside the Walker family. And I learned about it later that night. Because by midnight, 3 separate videos from the wedding had reached over 2 million views. Clips of Daniel kneeling. Clips of the canceled ceremony. Clips of Diane presenting the contract. The internet loved it. Comment sections filled with reactions. "Rich family tries to humiliate bride, gets destroyed." He lost $8 million and gained $850,000 debt in 10 minutes. That woman is terrifying. But the real damage was happening privately. Daniel's younger sister posted a furious message blaming Diane for the disaster. One of the Walker family's business partners publicly distanced himself from the scandal. An investment firm quietly removed Daniel's company from a pending partnership announcement. And then, early the next morning, my lawyer sent the official letter. A formal legal demand for repayment. $850,000. Due immediately. When Daniel received the notice, according to someone who worked at his company, he didn't speak for nearly 5 minutes. Because reality had finally caught up with him. The wedding was gone. The gift was gone. And now, the debt was very real. But the Walker family still had one weapon left. And Diane Walker was about to use it. 3 days after the wedding, Diane Walker decided to fight back. Not quietly. Not privately. Publicly. I first heard about it from my assistant early that morning. She burst into my office holding her phone like it was about to explode. "Lily," she said, breathless. "You need to see this." She placed the phone on my desk. A video interview was playing. The title read, "Chicago Socialite Speaks Out After Wedding Scandal." And there she was. Diane Walker. Perfect posture. Perfect hair. A soft gray suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She sat across from a local media host, looking composed but deeply wounded. It was a performance. And she was good. "I never intended to humiliate anyone," Diane was saying, her voice trembling just slightly. "I was only trying to protect my family." The interviewer nodded sympathetically. "From what, exactly?" Diane sighed heavily. "From someone who was clearly interested in our money." I leaned back in my chair. There it was. The word she wanted the public to hear. Gold digger. "I welcomed Lily into our family," Diane continued. "But certain things about her behavior concern me." The interviewer tilted her head. "What kind of concerns?" Diane folded her hands carefully. She constantly talked about investments, valuations, equity. She treated marriage like a business transaction. I couldn't help smiling slightly. That was an interesting accusation coming from the woman who had brought a legal contract to a wedding ceremony. The interview continued. "She claims she was giving my son $8 million, Diane said softly. "But no one has seen proof of that." I paused the video. That was the key moment. The lie she needed to push. My assistant looked nervous. "She's framing you as manipulative," she said. "Yes," I replied calmly. I picked up the phone again and continued watching. The interviewer asked the next obvious question. "And the loan she mentioned?" Diane's expression hardened. That supposed loan was a personal gift she later twisted into a legal threat. Another lie. But this one was more dangerous. Because unlike the dramatic wedding footage, most people had not seen the documents. And public opinion could move quickly when emotional stories appeared. The video ended with Diane delivering her final line. "My son is heartbroken," she said. "He truly loved her." I closed the video. My office was quiet. Outside the glass walls, my team continued working normally. Code reviews, product meetings, funding calls, real life. "Do you want me to respond?" my assistant asked. I shook my head.
No.
She looked confused. "Then what do we do?" I opened my laptop. "We don't respond emotionally." I pulled up a folder that had already been prepared. Legal documents, contracts, notary certifications, the original loan agreement, the equity transfer paperwork, everything. Then I made a call. My lawyer answered immediately. "I assume you've seen Diane Walker's interview," I said. "Yes," he replied. "And it contains several statements that qualify as defamation."
Good.
"File the lawsuit," I said. "How much?" I considered the number for a moment. $2 million. There was a brief pause. "That will get attention," he said. "That's the point." By the end of the day, the legal filing was complete. And, unlike Diane's emotional interview, our response came with documents. Certified. Stamped.
Public.
The loan contract. The notarized signatures. The equity transfer draft. Every piece of proof. By evening, the headlines had changed. Bride files $2 million defamation lawsuit against former mother-in-law. Legal documents contradict Diane Walker's interview. Walker family scandal deepens. But the most satisfying moment came late that night. The interview video disappeared. Quietly removed. And for the first time since the wedding, Diane Walker stopped talking. But someone else hadn't. Because Daniel Walker was about to make one final mistake. 2 weeks after the wedding, the noise had started to fade. The internet had moved on to new scandals. New headlines. New drama. But real consequences take longer to disappear. Daniel's company had not recovered. The legal demand for repayment had triggered a chain reaction. Investors started asking questions. Partners hesitated. One of his suppliers paused a contract, pending financial clarification. In business, reputation is oxygen. And Daniel was slowly suffocating. I tried not to think about him. My days were full again. Investor meetings. Product development. A new partnership negotiation with a venture firm from San Francisco. Life had returned to something resembling normal. Until one Thursday night. It was almost 9:30 p.m. when I left the office. Most of the building was dark. My company occupied 3 floors of a renovated warehouse in Chicago's West Loop. At night, the place became quiet except for the faint hum of servers and the occasional security patrol. I walked toward the underground parking garage, scrolling through a message from our lead engineer. The moment the elevator doors opened, I smelled alcohol.
Strong.
Sharp. Then I saw him. Daniel. He was leaning against a concrete pillar near my car. For a second, I just stood there. His suit was wrinkled. His hair messy. His eyes red. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in days.
"Lily," he said.
My stomach tightened slightly, but my voice stayed calm. "You shouldn't be here." He pushed himself off the pillar and walked toward me.
Slowly.
Unsteadily. "I've been calling you for 2 weeks," he said. "I know. You blocked me everywhere." "Yes." His laugh was bitter. "Of course you did." I kept my distance. "This is private property, Daniel," I said. "Security will remove you. I just need 5 minutes." His voice cracked slightly. 5 minutes. I didn't respond. Instead, I watched him carefully. He looked worse than I expected. Not just tired. Broken. "My company is collapsing," he said suddenly. I remained silent. "My investors pulled out," he continued. "Suppliers are demanding payment. The loan you filed." He stopped speaking. Because we both knew the number. $850,000. "You didn't have to do this," he whispered. I tilted my head slightly. "You brought a legal contract to our wedding." He ran a hand through his hair. "That was my mother. You stood beside her." Silence filled the garage. Then his voice dropped lower. "You ruined my life." The words echoed slightly off the concrete walls. I studied his face. "No," I said quietly. You ruined it yourself. Something in that sentence broke the fragile control he had left. You think you're better than everyone, he shouted. His voice echoed loudly. I loved you. I didn't raise my voice. You loved what I gave you. That made him step closer. Too close. His movements were unsteady, aggressive now. You think you're untouchable, he said. Before I could answer, another voice appeared behind us.
Calm. Cold.
That's close enough. Daniel turned.
So did I.
Adrian Cole was standing near the entrance of the garage.
Tall.
Impeccably dressed. And very clearly not happy. Adrian was one of the venture capital partners who had invested in my company earlier that year. But more importantly, he was someone people in the tech world listened to. Daniel Walker, Adrian said calmly. Daniel blinked. You know this man? Adrian asked me. Yes, I said. Adrian nodded once. Then he pulled out his phone. Security, he said into it. Daniel looked around suddenly, realizing the situation had shifted. You're calling security, he said. Yes. Adrian's voice remained calm. You're trespassing. And you appear intoxicated. Daniel laughed again, but it sounded hollow. This isn't your business. Adrian slipped his phone back into his pocket. It is when you approach one of my partners in a parking garage. The word partner landed with quiet weight. Daniel looked between us, understanding something. Too late. 2 security guards appeared at the garage entrance moments later. Sir, one of them said firmly, you need to leave. Daniel stared at me one last time. For a moment, I almost saw the man I used to love. Then the moment passed. The guards escorted him toward the exit. Adrian walked over to stand beside me. You okay? He asked. Yes. He looked toward the garage exit where Daniel had disappeared. He won't bother you again, Adrian said calmly. For the first time that night, I allowed myself a small breath. Because Daniel Walker had just made his final appearance in my life. And my future was only just beginning. 3 months later, the Walker family name had become something people in Chicago mentioned quietly. Not with admiration. With caution. Reputations don't collapse overnight. They erode.
Slowly.
Relentlessly. And once the cracks appear, everyone begins to notice them. Daniel's company was the first thing to fall. Without investor confidence, the business couldn't survive long. The repayment demand from my attorney forced his accountants to reveal financial weaknesses that had been hidden for years. Within 6 weeks, 2 major partners terminated their contracts. A month later, his primary investor withdrew completely. By the end of the quarter, the board removed Daniel as CEO. His own company.
Gone.
The loan repayment process moved through the courts quickly. The notarized contract left very little room for argument. Daniel eventually negotiated a settlement through his lawyers. Most of his remaining shares in the company were transferred to cover the debt. The money was recovered.
Clean.
Legal. Quiet. Diane Walker, meanwhile, tried to repair the family's public image. But the defamation lawsuit had changed the conversation. Her interview had disappeared. The legal documents were public. And the internet never forgets. The story had already spread too far. The Walker family's social circle slowly distanced itself. Invitations stopped arriving. Partnerships quietly dissolved. Even their Florida vacation homes, the 7 properties Diane had tried so hard to protect, became a strange symbol of the entire disaster. Luxury houses no one wanted to talk about anymore. As for Daniel, I heard very little after the parking garage incident. According to one mutual acquaintance, he moved out of Chicago for a while. Trying to rebuild. Trying to start over. But rebuilding a reputation is harder than building a company. Especially after millions of people have already watched it collapse. My life, on the other hand, moved forward. Neuralink systems continued growing faster than anyone expected. The product launched successfully that summer. Within months, our AI platform secured contracts with 3 major logistics companies. The same industry Daniel had once tried to dominate. Our valuation doubled, then doubled again. And 1 year after the canceled wedding, the company officially crossed a valuation of $100 million. I stood on the stage during our annual investor conference, presenting the numbers to a room full of partners and analysts.
Calm.
Focused. In control. After the presentation ended, the audience applauded. As I stepped off the stage, Adrian Cole was waiting near the side of the room. He had been one of the earliest investors to believe in the company. But over time, something else had developed between us. Something quieter. Something stronger than dramatic promises. Respect.
Trust.
Real partnership. You handled that well, Adrian said with a small smile. Thank you. He glanced at the presentation screen behind me where the company valuations still glowed. Not bad for someone who almost married into a real estate dynasty. I laughed softly. I think I chose the better investment. He raised an eyebrow. I certainly hope so. For a moment we both looked around the room. Engineers. Investors. Partners. The life I had built with my own decisions. No contracts at the altar. No public humiliations. Just work. And the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are. As the room slowly emptied, Adrian walked beside me toward the exit. The Chicago skyline glowed outside the glass windows.
Bright.
Endless. Full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something simple. Not revenge. Not anger. Just clarity. Because the truth was, I hadn't destroyed the Walker family. I hadn't ruined Daniel's life. They had done that themselves. All I did was refuse to let them ruin mine.